Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukie Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copies of the staff reports are available on the table in the hall. If you have not picked up an agenda, please do so. It contains important information about the process. If you wish to be included in the mailing list for a decision, please add your name and contact information to the sign-up list located on the table in the hallway. If you wish to testify, please also fill out a yellow comment card. We will follow the basic format listed on the back of the agenda. It includes all the hearing procedure steps. We may vary from the process based on the specific circumstances of each hearing. Next on the agenda is approval from the minutes from July 25th, 2017 and October 10th, 2017. Does anyone have any corrections to make?
Nope.
I will entertain a motion to approve the notes as presented.
I move.
I'll second that.
Moved by Commissioner Travis, seconded by Commissioner Argo. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? All right, so we have approved the minutes for July 25th, 2017 and October 10th, 2017. Are there any informational items from staff?
I've got two. Last night we had the first meeting of the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee, and Kim was in attendance. We had a good turnout. I think we were just missing one committee member. And it was just an overall introduction to the process, kind of where we're going, what the task is. So it was a short meeting and pretty positive. The second item is the second meeting in December for the commission would fall on the 26th. So staff has been under the impression that we would not hold that meeting. So unless you guys have some, pressing need to get together, that's going to be my recommendation. So that's all.
May I request that the planning commissioners be on the email list for the visionary committee when they're going to come?
The plan committee?
Yeah, just in case if any of us want to attend.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see that on the calendar.
We can do that.
Good suggestion.
If we could, please. Thank you. Audience participation. This is an opportunity to comment on an item that is not on tonight's agenda. If you wish to comment on an item that is on the agenda, there will be time for comments after the presentation. Does anyone wish to comment on an item that is not on tonight's agenda? All right. The next item on the agenda is the public hearing on the North Milwaukie Industrial Area Comp Plan Code and Amendments. The public hearing on file number ZA2017-003 and CPA-2017-002 is called to order. The purpose of this hearing is to consider legislative amendments to the North Milwaukie Industrial Area Comp Plan and Code Amendments. I will recognize those persons who have completed the testimony cards and have given them to me. If you want to do it during the meeting, hand them on over to Denny and he'll get them to me. When you come to the podium, please state your name and address for the record so that they may be entered into the minutes. If you are here to testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and the relevant criteria and to avoid repetition and irrelevant information. We are going to run the clock at 3 minutes for each person testifying, since we have so many people testifying this evening. Commissioner participation. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest?
No.
No. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain?
No.
No.
No. Let's proceed to the staff report, please.
Good evening. Vera Coles, Associate Planner in the Planning Department. And with me is Amy Koski, Economic Development Coordinator. We're going to tag team this presentation.
Can you speak a little closer or pull it up?
Yes.
Yeah.
We're going to tag team this presentation since we both have parts as part of this project. Okay. The background for this project is fairly simple. We had a project goal that was to implement the North Milwaukie Industrial Area Framework Plan and implementation strategy. On July 18th, 2017, after multiple advisory group meetings and public open houses and 3 Planning Commission meetings, City Council adopted a resolution directing staff to prepare plan and code amendments to implement the NMIA Framework Plan and implementation strategy. The plan focuses on increasing employment density in the area, providing amenities to serve employees, and accommodating office and industrial flex space. The map here shows, just for some context, we have Milwaukie down at the south, the NMIA, or the North Milwaukie Industrial Area, outlined in red and shaded in orange, and then you see downtown Portland just to the north, just to understand kind of the geography of the area that we're referring to. Okay. Tonight's hearing is the first of what we anticipate to be 3 public hearings for this project. Certainly can go more, but that's sort of how we've outlined it. Tonight's hearing will focus on all the plan amendments, so the comprehensive plan and all of the parts that go with the comprehensive plan. This is a big project, and it seemed to make sense to split up the discussion items to really focus on those chunks. It would be probably impossible to go through everything tonight, so we thought that we had these in doable bites for now. The draft NMIA plan being presented to the Commission includes some remaining elements from the Tacoma Station area plan that were not specifically addressed in the newly adopted plan. So we're reconciling the NMIA plan with the Tacoma Station area plan. Part of this project would also repeal the Tacoma Station area plan because both of those documents are going to be put together in this new updated and revised NMIA plan. And we're going to get into these in detail, but this sort of just summarizes what we're talking about this evening. There are updates to the Transportation System Plan, or the TSP. There are various transportation projects that were outlined in the NMIA plan, and we need to make sure that those are included in the TSP. There are also some sort of edits to the TSP where we need to reconcile the fact that the TSAP is going away, so we need to make all that text work together. And then, of course, there are updates to the actual comprehensive plan language, specifically in Chapter 4, land use, the economic base and industrial commercial land use element. So there are maps and there are text changes in there as well as to amend the map that shows, that identifies the actual Tacoma Station area. And we'll talk about that later in the presentation as well.
Can I interrupt for just one second? As Vera noted, we're thinking it's going to take 3 hearings to get through everything. So the second meeting is really focused on the code elements, what changes would occur in the zoning ordinance. Right. So I think in terms of testimony, if folks have comments on that, I think you might want to go ahead and take them anyway tonight. But I mean, really, I think the discussion that we'd like you to have tonight is focused on the plan rather than code issues.
Sort of the bigger policy discussion this evening. Okay.
So the first set of changes are to the NMIA plan, and we had included a red line document in your packet. The first thing is to rename the plan from NMIA Framework and Implementation Strategy just to NMIA Plan. And so this is the new iteration that would be updated to reflect a handful of changes that I'll outline briefly here. We also want to remove some of the appendices and just refer to them as standalone documents so that this document can be easily utilized, isn't a huge binder full of documents, but it would still reference back to the existing conditions reports and the transportation analysis and all the other work that was done throughout the last year. We would also note the repeal of the Tacoma Station Area Plan, and where necessary, note that it was the 2013 plan. That's a reference that we realized needed to be made to clearly distinguish, but also carrying forward information from the Tacoma Station Area Plan into this plan so it really can stand alone. adding the natural features map and narrative that came out of our existing conditions report, but we realized that needed to be in this plan. And also updating the newly proposed zone names to the MU TSA and the NME, the Tacoma Station Area Mixed Use Zone and the North Milwaukie Employment Zone, which we'll outline later. Also, and the zoning and land use category table, we're proposing updating that based on the new zoning that we will talk throughout this public hearing process.
And again, these changes are because there are changes from the plan that City Council moved forward as part of the resolution, and also because this plan will become an ancillary document to the comprehensive plan. So just sort of setting up that background.
So some of the other things that we're bringing into this new revised NMIA plan would be some figures and cross sections for key streets that were in the Tacoma Station Area Plan: Ochoco, Main, Mailwell, Stubb, and a couple of 40-foot, 60-foot local street setups, concepts. So we'll be bringing those into the document and then inserting two concepts. One was an ODOT alignment for Ochoco Street, and then the other was a proposed Main Street alignment. If we click to the next slide, you can see what those are here. The ODOT concept for Ochoco Street is a solution if the NMIA plan concept that offers an alternative configuration for this area isn't redeveloped or isn't constructed in that way. So this would be kind of a fallback. This was in the Tacoma Station. The Main Street alignment provides additional detail that was prepared in the Tacoma Station Area Plan and is in our TSP, Transportation Systems Plan, but we wanted to just make sure it was also here. A little bit of cross-pollination there. We are adding some design elements that include some narrative and example photos in the document, also from the Tacoma Station Area Plan. They show some of the building types and examples of what we would like to see in the area with the zoning. And then making an addition to our non-motorized street network map, number 12, adding a stairway from the Springwater Corridor to McLaughlin on the west side of McLaughlin. That was always in the Tacoma Station Area Plan, and we didn't seem to get it into this plan, so correcting that. Finally, we went through with the redlined version that you have, made those edits back in October for some of our work sessions, and then have since reviewed, gone through the document again, and found some additional edits, kind of grammatical, temporal edits that make sense to make. And so there's a list in your packet of all of those. And so what our plan is to do is bring you back a fully edited version by January 9th that would incorporate all of these things. But what you see in front of you are the changes that we would be making into the InDesign document that needs to get fully updated.
Yeah?
Yep.
All right. Another aspect of the comprehensive plan is the transportation systems plan. So the TSP is an ancillary document in the comp plan, and so we have various changes that we're proposing as part of the package. The TSP is the city's long-term plan for transportation improvements, includes policies and projects that can then be implemented through the capital improvements plan. So when projects are proposed as part of the NMIA plan, they need to be in the TSP, and then those are carried forward eventually within the capital improvements plan itself. This is the guiding policy document for long-term transportation planning, and of course represents the city's goals and policies for vehicular, pedestrian, and bicycle transportation throughout the city. The NMIA plan includes several implementation strategies to improve circulation within the district and connecting to districts and neighborhoods surrounding it. Includes vehicular, pedestrian, and bicycle connectivity as several different projects. So in order to move those strategies forward, those projects have to be identified in the TSP. So the amendments that you have in your packet, the underlined strikeout version, we've included those projects. We haven't prioritized them at this stage of the project, but they're included in the charts. They're included, there are some narrative edits to, again, reconcile the TSAP with the NMIA plan as well, but to make sure that we include those projects within the TSP as well. The comprehensive plan itself has a couple of different sections that need to be revised. The proposed amendments do change some existing policies that refer to the Tacoma Station area as it relates to the TSAP, the actual 2013 plan. We've proposed a new objective in Chapter 4 in that economic base and commercial industrial land use element, objective number 17, that identifies the North Milwaukie industrial area as a new planning area. If you recall, when we did the work for the Central Milwaukie area a couple of years ago through the Moving Forward Milwaukie project, we did this same thing. The Central Milwaukie was identified as a planning area. It is objective 16 that was added to the comp plan to reflect that planning area, and a new map was created to reflect that planning area. So what you see here on the slide is the proposed map, map 10, that would be included in the comp plan that identifies the NMIA as this planning area. And then we do include a new objective, objective number 17, that would adopt and implement the NMIA plan itself. Amendments are also proposed for 2 comprehensive plan maps, an amendment to map 8, which is the overall land use map that identifies the comprehensive plan land use designations through the city, and that revises the boundary of the Tacoma Station area, and we'll get to that a little bit later in the presentation as part of one of the key questions or key issues that we've asked. And again, this new map 10 that identifies the NMIA itself. We've proposed some strikeout, some language changes within the area that, or within the section that talks about the actual Tacoma Station area, so that we can, it still fits with the policies that are set up for the TSA itself, but it removes references to the TSAP plan, and so updates it to talk about the NMIA and anything that's sort of redundant, because we have this new objective. We want to make sure that those two work together, as opposed to having redundant or even conflicting language. We are, although we had established this, we had proposed that we have this hearing schedule talk about zoning and the code amendments and so on for the second hearing, the details for that. One of the key issues or key questions that we've asked the commission to talk about this evening does have to do with the proposed zoning itself. It is kind of an overall policy question that we think fits within what we're talking about here as far as this overreaching policy for the NMIA, and that has to do with the zoning that we're proposing. On the map, you see the current zoning on the left, wherein we have actually 5 zones of interest in this area. We have the manufacturing zone, which is in the purple, and then we have the Tacoma Station area manufacturing zone, which has 4 overlay or 4 sub areas, 1, 2, 3, and 4. The proposal is to combine those areas so that we have one Tacoma Station area mixed use zone in the north and northeast section, that area that is closer to the Tacoma Station area itself. So we would be removing all the sub areas and just create one zone, and then combine the TSA 4 sub area with the M manufacturing zone as it relates to the NMIA, and create one zone called the North Milwaukie employment zone, so that we sort of going from 5 down to 2 zones. And that was my own segue into key question number 1, which is asking whether the boundary of that mixed-use Tacoma Station area should be revised to also include the area bounded by Millport, 17th Ave, and McLaughlin Boulevard. And you can see that in the southwest area of the NMIA. The commission did discuss this, has discussed this in the past, and had agreed that the southwest area of the NMIA should be zoned, this mixed-use Tacoma Station area, rather than the NME. At the time that this was discussed in the summer, during the NMIA plan process, the commission talked about the creation of an overlay with no standalone multifamily residential, and a 10-year sunset. So it was at the time was discussed as an overlay on top of the NME. That was the original recommendation from the commission to the city council during the adoption of the NMIA plan. City council decided to not move forward with that recommendation when they adopted the plan in July of 2017. The commission, however, and that So what we've done, and when we went through the work sessions with the commission and this issue came up, basically we said that we would come back to the commission with some options on how to address that particular area. And essentially that discussion that the commission had several months ago was what we would call, I guess, option 3, this idea of this overlay that had a sunset period that would apply to this area. In the work sessions that we had in October, the discussion seemed to be that perhaps it would just be the MUTSA zone itself and just apply that to the area rather than as an overlay. It would just be the MUTSA zone on that. So like that. So at this point, the key question that staff is asking for direction or in a recommendation from the commission is one of 3 options. So the first would be to maintain the NME and the mixed use area as proposed as came from council in the adoption of the plan. Option 2 would be to just apply that TSA mixed use zone on the area in question, or option 3 would be to create that as an overlay on top of the NME, and that there would be this sunset period of a 10-year sunset for that mixed use possibility for the zone. So that's key question number 1. All right. And my guess is that I think a good majority of the testimony will be about key question number 1. Key questions 2 and 3 are more general to some degree and really asking, does the commission have any questions or concerns about the NMIA plan itself, the reconciliation that we're proposing between the TSAP and the NMIA, or it as an overlying policy document? Are there any concerns or questions that you have about the way that we've sort of glued that together? Question 3 is, again, a general question about any concerns or about the revisions to the comp plan text, that Chapter 4, or that Section 4, the map that we've proposed to create the NMIA as a separate new planning area, or any questions about the TSP amendments. And we also bring up that making these changes and making these proposals does include that we have to provide a finding for compliance with Goal 12, which is the transportation goal, the transportation planning goal. And included in your packet was a draft set of findings, so you can see how we kind of worked through these comprehensive plan amendments and the findings, as well as a trip generation analysis memo that was provided that we had done as part of the NMIA plan to make sure that we were in compliance with the transportation planning rule itself. The analysis was based on buildable acreage, an assumption of potential land uses and floor area ratio, or FAR. The analysis took into account that a portion of the area is an identified station area, so there are some sort of discounts for transportation and trips that can be applied to areas that are designated as station areas because of the proximity to the light rail station. Based on the proposed development requirements and the proposed zoning, there are changes to the reasonable worst case development assumptions that are developed as part of that transportation analysis, including a reduction in office use and an increase in the industrial use to balance out those uses to make sure that we're not overloading the system with these zone changes. That's ultimately what we need to be able to show through the findings. In fact, with the proposed land use and the zones, what the analysis came up with was, in fact, a slight reduction in the peak number of trips as part of the overall land use layout that we were proposing. And at this point, there was essentially a no net increase in trip generation from the area over what is there today, or what was proposed as part of the TSAP in 2013 as well. So no further transportation planning rule analysis would be required as far as the way that the traffic analysis in that memo went. So we're happy to answer any questions about that. But we're quite happy to see kind of how, because of the station area itself and the way the land use mixes were working, we weren't going to be overloading the system with the zone changes, and that was part of the concern that we had going forward with this. But it looks like we're going to be okay as far as that goes. And then finally, key question 4 is back to the Tacoma Station area itself, how it's identified. Originally, and the map that you see on the left is a section of our land use map in the comprehensive plan. And the Tacoma Station area was mapped as basically the entire TSA that was mapped all the way down, that included essentially all the way down to downtown. And much of that area is well outside that typical sort of half-mile radius that you might map from a light rail station or from a transit hub. Staff is proposing to revise that boundary to include those properties that are really within that half-mile radius. So the map that you see on the right is the proposed revision or amendment to map 8 in the comprehensive plan to more, I guess, sort of more real world and accurately reflect what is the true station area. And that would really take sort of that benefit of that light rail and the proximity to the light rail station. So what you see on the right identifies those lots or those parcels or those areas that fit within what would be that arc of a half mile from the station itself. Frankly, it seems to be a bit, we believe, more defensible if asked about, taking, credits or something from a trip generation for proximity to a station. If you're actually really within that half mile, that's something that we thought made much more sense than what the original mapping was as a result of the 2013 plan. So that's the end of the key questions. The next couple of slides talk about our recommendations and sort of next steps. But at this point, I think we'll probably conclude the PowerPoint and kind of go back to the key questions and start from there if you have any questions, and move ahead with the remainder of the testimony tonight. So I'll sort of go back up to.
Can I jump in? Amy, were you gonna make a couple comments about ODOT's references to?
Yeah, ODOT had asked when they reviewed our trip generation analysis and our transportation demand management plan strategy for how we would meet all these increases in traffic that will happen, even though we're not tripping the transportation planning rule. They had asked that we include in our transportation demand management strategy and placing time limits on parking. That's something that we haven't added as an action up to this point. So that would be an addition that we should look to add to the list of changes, probably in an action item in the plan. And that was actually the main one. They also wanted us to research some other successful TMAs in the area, such as Swan Island, the Lloyd District, and we needed to check and see if there's one for Central East Side, but I'm not sure that that's in existence. No.
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I used to serve on a TMA. There isn't one there. Not at this time.
Great. So those were 2 additions or things to add and expand on a little bit in the plan when it comes to how we will mitigate and handle traffic in the area and encourage alternative modes. I did have an email that I received, and I don't believe is here for testimony. Is that something I should mention now?
No, I think
later.
We'll let the commission answer questions, and then you can enter that later.
Are there any clarifying questions for staff?
So on that note, actually, doesn't the Transportation Management Association, wouldn't that get at ODOT's concerns about the transportation demand management plan? Or I'm not getting that plan right that you just referenced, but wouldn't that happen? And that's listed under the eco-district framework.
It is an action out of the plan is to establish a TMA, an association to manage all of this, but there are certain actions that and the strategy, the transportation demand management strategy, goes into even more detail about all of the things that we should be doing. But I think it's relevant to mention that we might want to look at, through our TDM plan and through our TMA that gets established, at time limits as something to consider.
That's typically the type of thing that that's dealt with administratively by the city manager, setting those time limits. It's not something that we would specify in a plan document. What we'd specify in the plan document is that it is a strategy that you can use, a tool that you can use.
Yeah.
I just have to ask this. Why does timed parking make a difference? Does it just mean that it keeps the load off of peak hours?
It starts to have an effect on people making different choices, I think is the logic behind it, that and eventually you could add paid parking too. So
I was going to ask that,
yeah,
right?
That would be
meter
another,
parking,
right.
Or
there's sort of a phased approach that happens as you introduce these concepts into a district, but first phase would be putting time limits and enforcing them, which is that's all a project in and of itself. But then the next could be adding meters, and then those types of efforts to try to get people to switch their habits.
As regards the TSP, at this time you aren't prioritizing the projects. It seems that feels like that could be a cumbersome effort if, considering you already have an adopted TSP with prioritized projects. So how do you open that back up, and where will it fold in? I'm just thinking in terms of, is that complicated regarding the capital improvement plan that you have in place? Or do you just kind of look at it and what makes sense maybe for a phased prioritization?
We've been doing prioritization more as part of the CIP process, and looking at the plan prioritization pretty much as guidance and direction. But not every project has been funded in a way that exactly corresponds to the priorities being given in the TSP. There's a number of projects that were funded, that have been now funded through the SAFE program, that didn't show up in the TSP. So I think it's just something we need to fix over time, try to bring those things into alliance.
I guess it was like another way to say, could there be a project that has support that could be a loser in the game of reprioritization, or really it's just another wrinkle of prioritization?
Yeah, we have not explored. There's many projects in the NMIA, and we have not explored funding strategies for those as of yet. So this plan it's sort of the wish list of projects, and we need another layer here of how do we pay for those projects. That's still coming.
So after this gets adopted, then it will go to PSAC to look at, to be able to put prioritization in the CIP?
Well, I think there is the plan calls for a number of different potential funding strategies. So we're going to just have to open that up and look at how we might do that, what we want to pursue, and then what priorities we want to place on the projects, and do that at the same time.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
I had another question. I'm trying to understand how the Tacoma Station area relates to the MUTSA zone, and that you showed the proposed changes to the Tacoma Station area in question 4, moving to the west side of McLaughlin and south of Ochiko, but that would not be part of the MUTSA.
The zone itself, right.
So what is the TSA? How does that impact policies or project prioritization? Is it a separate area from the MUTSA zone?
Station areas are identified through as part of metros, larger planning process in the region. So they meet certain goals as far as being proximate to transit, what kind of transportation, again, sort of the discount in trip generation, because you're assuming that folks are going to be able to take advantage of transit. So it's really more of it's establishing a policy and its connection to transit as opposed to zoning and land use necessarily. So in this case, you're right, there is some, let me go back to that map. So when you're looking at kind of what area is half mile from the station, it does bleed over into what we're identifying as an employment zone rather than just the mixed use area. But they do meet in some ways two different kinds of goals. There's sort of that overall kind of proximity to transit and that ability to be able to take advantage of transit and have land use policies that align with being proximate to transit. But at the same time, our zoning, our land use goals also include making sure that we're maintaining land that's available for more of the employment, industrial, manufacturing use. So the entire MUTSA is in the Tacoma Station area, but then it also, because of that, just a distance, it's just math, kind of geography, happens to include that industrial manufacturing zone as
I'd like
well.
to add something
Please,
about that. The way Metro's Title VI in the Urban Growth Functional Plan is written, it addresses town centers, station areas, regional centers, and it requires a boundary for your station area, and you have to have a boundary and a plan in place in order to be eligible for funding, for transportation project funding. And so what this boundary would help do is establish where that boundary is, what plan policies are relevant there, and what where we might be eligible for that specific funding package. It doesn't exclude us from going after Metro funding outside of that area, but it's generally a separate package of money. So it's primarily just a way of saying, here's the area around the station, we're fixing our boundary, we know that we might want to go after regional money at some point. I'm not sure what. We've already gotten a lot of the regional money that we're going to get for this area in terms of the light rail expenditure. So it's, in a sense, kind of a formality, and recognizing that the old boundary just took in the MTSA area, and it was a bit of I don't know how they did it. It was a bit of a stretch going as far south as they did it, but it was adopted.
Are there any implications for having Johnson Creek as a natural resource in a TSA that are beneficial or detrimental to the natural resource function?
No, because all of the other titles are, all the other protections are still in place. It doesn't override anything. It's primarily about opportunities for regional funding.
It also allowed for us to get a little reduction on the transportation analysis, the trip generation, because we were within that half mile roughly, we got a 30% reduction for the trip generation in that area.
I was just wondering about, with the creek being in the TSA, if there are opportunities for pedestrian connections along the creek frontage and providing access to the natural resource that also provide a pedestrian connection to the station, if that's something that this change opens up that opportunity.
Right. Oh, that's a good point. Yep.
Any other questions for staff? Ms. Collis?
Oski?
Yes, I'm sorry.
2 Ks.
Why don't you guys just stay at your station, because I know that normally you do, because I'm going to ask a question, and I think you each need a microphone, maybe.
Okay.
Have we received any correspondence on this matter other than those items included in the meeting packet?
Yes. So what I would like, I didn't have a chance to print out the copy, so what I'd like to do is I could bring that to the next hearing, but I can mention that it had to do with the addition I mentioned, that it was the carryover of the stairway connection from the Springwater corridor on the west side. the person had a question about that, thinking it was not on the west side and on the east side. And so that led into a further conversation about we really should have a stairway on the east side, and maybe that makes more sense than the three. We've kind of proposed three different options for connecting to the Springwater corridor or through it or under it with a tunnel to get to Tacoma Station. And so it's something that we would need to look at further, but I can print that input out and bring it to the next public hearing, if that makes sense. Enter it into the record properly that way.
Is that something you could potentially print, go into the other room there and print off copies?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we could do that, and as folks are testifying, yeah.
Is that it? Okay.
all.
Thank you, guys.
Shall I leave this on the key question? Is that sort of where you want?
I don't know who, don't they have to use a computer for
Oh, okay.
for their presentation?
I don't know who's testifying in what order or what's happening, so.
Okay. All right, so now we're going to move into testimony, public testimony in support of the application. And just a reminder, Commissioner Burns is going to be the timer. So we have 3 minutes on the clock. It blinks yellow at 30 seconds, right?
Yellow
I think
at
that's
30
right.
seconds.
Yellow at 30 seconds, and then when the red hits, that means that it's time to wrap it on up, and it actually beeps too, so it gets a little annoying. And so if you could please hold your comments to 3 minutes. And I just want to remind everybody, it's not too late. If you still want to fill out a yellow card, hand it on over to Denny, and he'll get it over to me. And please state your name and address for the record. And so first one up will be Nabil Kanso.
Good evening. My name is Nabil Kanso, Senior. I own the business on 10966 Southeast McLaughlin Boulevard on Jefferson and McLaughlin, and this is the gas station, 76 gas station. I'm here to testify to keeping the mill-end store in place. Before they invented the cell phone and the Google Maps and all, 1989 on, been there 29 years. And everybody, I get about 800 to 1,000 people in my store daily. And when we were even 24 hours, now we open like 18 hours. Everybody asks for the mill-end store. It's identified with Milwaukie. It's been there for a long, long time, up to even recently, people from out of town, people traveling 99E, they pull into the store, they fill up gas, and they ask, where's the mill-end store? Whether they're lost or they don't have a phone to direct them, to where the thing is. They do ask anyway, even though they have the map. So, I've known the mill-end store for a long time. Even my wife comes from Beaverton down to the mill-end store to shop. And so there's a lot of people. I'm here in support of keeping that mill-end store in there, in place. I've known, the station there always been like a hub, for people lost. And I've seen people ask me where McLaughlin is, standing in my store. So from that, I would say the mill-end store is really a thing we identify Milwaukie with, and I'm support to just keeping that property as is and the mill-end store. That's it.
Any questions for Mr. Kanso?
No.
Nope.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next up is Kelly Keener.
I have to read because I can't.
It's very organized together. Kelly Keener, Chair of the Downtown Milwaukee Business Association, as well as local business owner, and have 2 family members that own businesses in downtown Milwaukee too. So fairly connected to the community. I'm actually going to read a letter from our association in addition to a couple letters I received tonight. So I'll just read through each one as we go along. I'm here this evening regarding the NMIA comp plan and code amendments. As the chair of the DMBA, I'm here to speak in support of one of our own. The Mill End Store is one of our longest operating local and family-owned businesses in the city of Milwaukee. We are appealing to the commission regarding proposed amendments that would keep this valuable business from continuing to operate and develop for another 100 years. We as a city and its businesses are fortunate to have this locally owned company in our community. As a retailer myself on Main Street, the Mill End Store is an asset in our city portfolio of specialty businesses and not another of the same, as is happening in so many of the areas that are under aggressive development. Milwaukee has a unique opportunity to stand out as a city of experiences, which millennials want, to treasure the history of our longtime residents and community members, and showcase the value of local and specialty products and services that you simply cannot find anywhere else. As we grow, instead of becoming the same steel and cement as some of our surrounding communities, Milwaukee has an opportunity and responsibility to be progressive in our thinking and planning by partnering with a business such as the Mill End Store, who is trying to invest in Milwaukee for the future. We urge you to consider this Milwaukee asset as decisions and recommendations are made here tonight. This letter is from Brent Heeb, who is the president of Stars Antique Malls over in the Selwood Moreland area. I've been a longtime customer of the Mill End Store in Milwaukee, as of countless of my antiques and vintage dealers at Stars Antique Malls. I know that it is a destination for many of my customers. I would hope that the Mill End Store will be able to continue in business at their current location as a valuable asset to our community of Selwood, Westmoreland. The final is from Randy Thomas, who is a longtime customer of downtown Milwaukee and the Mill End Store, as you'll hear. I've been a longtime customer of the Mill End Store since the 1970s. From sewing clothes, especially my wedding dress, to home decorating projects, the Mill End Store has been the one store I could always count on to provide what I was looking for to inspire my creative side. A special treat while I was busy working was to spend some time just strolling the store to see what trinkets and treasures I could find. The quality fabrics and unique selection, coupled with the expertise of the staff, create a very unique shopping experience, not one I found anywhere else in the Portland metro area. No pun intended, but the Mill End Store is part of the fabric of our community, and it would be a great loss if it were no longer around.
Any questions for Ms. Keener?
No, thank you.
Staff, did you get a copy of that, of the Downtown Business Association letter? Ms. Keener, may I make a special request that you get Vera's email and email that so that we can have a copy? Thank you. Next up is Roger C. Sutherland, please.
I think he has the...
You have a copy of the presentation I'm going to do. My name is Roger C. Sutherland. I'm at 962 Southwest Ebb Avenue, Lincoln City, 97367. That's my retirement location. I had a house in Aloha I just sold. I wanted to, basically we're going to address the key question number one, and I'm having testimony in support of residential being part of that zoning at this site. I'm a water resources, practicing water resources consultant, registered civil engineer, been doing this for a long time. Actually did a flood study on Johnson Creek, had the flood insurance maps were all our creation for a period of time until they were just recently revised. Let's go right to the heart of the problem. There's the effective flood insurance rate map of Johnson Creek. The mill end store is right in the center of that map. We're going to blow it up in a minute. Note that north is up. In the blow-up version of this, if we look to the east and to the south of Millport, that's the mill end store. With all the polka dots on it, that's the 100-year floodplain. The site is totally within the 100-year floodplain, but notice it's outside of the floodway, so development is permitted. The base flood elevation is 36 feet, and that's NAVD 88, which is the FEMA datum. The outside elevation, ground floor elevation at the entry of this store is 30 feet. So those that are having difficulty with math, there's 6 feet of water on this site. That's a lot of storage volume. Storage volume is regulated under all of the codes in the metropolitan area, including your own code. And that's the City of Milwaukie Municipal Code, Title 18, Chapter 1804, specifically 18.04.150F, that says the displacement of flood storage area by the placement of fill or structures, including building foundations, shall conform to the following standards for balanced cut and fills. And I've actually provided some of the code language there so we can discuss. A, very important, no net fill in any floodplain is allowed. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's explained in B. All fill placed in the floodplain shall be balanced with at least an equal amount of soil material removal. But C is the kicker. Any excavation below bank full stage shall not count towards compensating for fill. You cannot dig a hole. You cannot put up a levee. That's a picture taken from Google Earth looking south from Millport to the entry of the mill end store. The store's on the left, creek's on the right. You can clearly see there is no material to be removed. So, industrial use of the mill end store is not a practical use given the city's current floodplain regulations. I've listed a lot of reasons that's the case, but number one is the only technically feasible way to satisfy this code is to create an above grade elevation, and that above grade has to be 7 feet in this case, 6 feet for the flood and 1 foot on top of that, which is also part of the code. So it makes sense that if you're going to create a structure and elevate it and all the costs associated with that you would put parking underneath. But you don't have to put parking underneath. Just that's the way it's been done in the past. A lot of, when you think about industrial uses, it's just not practical. I'm not going to go into all the details. You can read about them there. Given the current city floodplain regulations, the only practical and economically viable use would be residential or a mixed use that includes residential, because once again, it has to be elevated so that area can flood and it can drain safely. If people are parking their cars there, they're going to have plenty of time. This is backwater from the Willamette River. It's not Johnson Creek flooding. There'll be plenty of time to know the big flood's coming like there was in 1996, and people will be able to move their cars out of harm's way. Thank you.
And any questions for Mr. Sutherland?
None for me. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. Next up is Eric Hovey.
Good evening. My name is Eric Hovey, 2408 Main Street, Vancouver, Washington. I'm here to testify in support of mixed-use housing and employment on the Mill End store site. I've been doing economic and development consulting for 40 years, actually getting my start working for the cities of Portland and Vancouver doing economic development before forming my consulting practice. And I get involved in industrial, commercial, residential, mixed-use, transit-oriented development, and related capital project assignments. Back in June, this commission voted to recommend what was then an MTSA overlay, including residential, if developed with on-site employment use, with a 10-year sunset provision for the mill-in site. I would offer 4 reasons to reaffirm your previous recommendation to the council with a couple added caveats. First, to reinforce the testimony of Roger Sutherland, it is clear that any redevelopment on this site will require elevating the first occupied and the enclosed floor of the building to be above the 100-year floodplain. Cut and fill is not an option. The only viable economic use of the ground floor is for parking, which would sit underneath the other building uses on the floors above. Second, because structured parking will cost $30,000 or more per parking space, rental rates for the tenants will need to be substantially more than the rates for similar space made available elsewhere in the Milwaukie area. Above market rents will be required to pay for this added cost of development, but the high rents required will make the site uncompetitive for industrial, office, or commercial uses. The only privately developed use that supports the cost of structured parking outside the most urban and high-value core areas of this metro area without public subsidy is multifamily housing. Only residential use can afford to pay for the cost of structured parking, which is also essential for the mill-in store to be rebuilt on site. Third, the idea that the Milwaukie market can support the rents needed to pay the cost of a multi-story industrial structure is not realistic for the foreseeable future. Analysis that was done for the NMIA by Echo Northwest reinforced this point. It concluded the multi-story industrial development like Portland's New York building would require about a $10 to $11 million public subsidy. And that analysis did not include any mention of the extra costs to elevate the first floor of industrial or commercial space to get above the 100-year floodplain. High-cost, structured parking is unavoidable and consequently will make industrial redevelopment even more cost-prohibitive. Fourth and finally, it is the recognition that the existing mill-in building will be eventually removed, whether it's with a future flood or as this 63-year-old former Omark building becomes ever more obsolete and unusable. Because the site is and will remain deep in the floodplain, it will not be viable for redevelopment unless housing is included. Location in the floodplain will always remain the pivotal constraint to address for this site, whether the redevelopment happens next year, 10 years from now, or 20 years from now. For these reasons, we would strongly encourage the reaffirmation of your prior recommendation to the council for a mixed-use zoning or overlay allowing for rebuilding of the mill-in store and all made financially feasible with housing above, but without the 10-year sunset provision. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Hovey?
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, sir. Next up is Jerry Basinger, please.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Jerry Basinger. I'm the president of Basinger Partners Architecture. We are a mid-sized firm in Portland specializing in commercial, retail, mixed use, and restaurant design. We've practiced in 22 states. I was asked to look at this site kind of through the eyes of the regulations, and I'll zip through a few slides. We got a blocked going up there. Ha! There you go. Did that drop? Okay. Sorry about that. So the first slide was showing the site relative to Johnson Creek and Millport. This is the section of the industrial plan. This is a slide that Roger showed, which is highlights the mill-end store site. It's 100% in the floodplain. We developed a concept for the site that would keep the mill-end store at about the area that it currently occupies, is 65,000 square feet. Mill-ends is a bulky retail use, meaning that it requires, per Milwaukie code, about half the parking that a general retail type use would require. and that's because they display everything from carpets to fabrics to other materials, and spend a lot of their square footage in things other than concentrated customer racks and shelving. The concept shows a elevated deck, there we go, which is south of the building, loading dock in about the only place we can have it, which is at the north. And then on current grade level, we park under the building, and then the parking would extend on out to the south for as far as we can before we run into the buffer zone along Johnson Creek. We can self-park for the retail at about 2.5 or 3 spaces per 1,000, and for the residential, this concept shows up to 1.5 spaces per unit. We have 140 units on 4 or 5 floors stacked above the retail. So in the section, you can see, if I switch to the section, this shows 4 floors, 140 units. Retail requires more headroom, and then you've got parking below. The parking below is primarily parking for the residential. We like to separate the retail from the residential parking. I'll go back one. The concept really does support the concept of putting or allowing housing, as Eric testified, it is a use that will afford the amount of structured parking that we need to provide to make this desirable for potential tenants, as well as for the retail use or Billings use. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Basinger? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Peter Stark, please. It's almost like you knew you were up next, didn't you?
ESP. Gotta make sure I know which button is which. Hang on.
Spacebar will work.
Page down.
There. Okay. I'll just do it. Got it. Okay. My name is Peter Stark. I'm at 2939 Northwest Cornell Road in Portland, Oregon. I'm a licensed architect in the state of Oregon, and I've also participated in many planning efforts, including 20 years plus in the Central East Side, and most recently on the NMIA Project Advisory Committee. I'm here on behalf of the Dietrichs and the Mill End Store in support of the MUTSA zoning on the site. First, I wish to thank the Planning Commission for twice. First time through over the summer, and the second time of the work session, to suggest that housing could be appropriate at this location. But from our point of view, it's more important than that. We're hopeful that your voice will convince City Council that housing is necessary for development, and more importantly, any future development or employment investment on the site. The Dietrichs and the Mill End Store wish to continue to be part of this community. It is for that reason that we're here today. So you've heard from 3 very well-established experts that are knowledgeable about floodplain and economy as well as the architecture. But just to reiterate the points they've made, the site's in the 100-year floodplain and it's heavily encumbered. The Mill End Store has a history of flooding and will likely need to be demolished sometime in the future. The Mill End, given the elevation of the site is 6 feet below the floodplain, and given current floodplain regulations, any new development on the site would need to be built above grade and allow flooding to happen underneath. Parking could be utilized under the building and is allowed to flood. However, the cost to elevate is substantial. The development would need to offset those costs through higher lease rates. However, the only economically viable use that would allow those higher lease rates has to include housing. So mixed-use housing would be an option. Since employment is primary to the NMIA, housing should be allowed where floodplains make traditional industrial or office uses impractical and prohibitive from a cost point of view. These same arguments were made at the NMI meetings, as Adam will testify, that we have, I pointed out the flooding concerns, and frankly, the only opposition that we've really had has been coming from the city. Slide 2, hang on. there. And I wanted to point out that the area we're talking about is substantial. If the mill-in store is not able to develop, if they need to leave, you can see the amount of area that is left. It's almost as if this decision to move forward the current planning happens, they won't be able to do anything. And so the question is, maybe the city has something else in mind for their site, and we noticed that, it might be a good park. But if we don't proceed with allowing some type of use that will allow them to develop, the mill-in store can't stay, nor can any development. And that's the point we've been trying to make. It's not a question of whether or not we can have development in this area. If the zoning will not allow the type of development for anything, nothing will be there. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Stark?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next up is Nancy Bishop Dietrich, please, and Howard Dietrich.
Hello, I'm Nancy Bishop Dietrich at 9701 Southeast McLaughlin Boulevard, and I'm here with my husband, Howard Dietrich. And we're here to please ask that you consider a exception or a zoning overlay on our property. As you've heard from several people, we have been in the community a long time, and we feel like we are a nationally recognized independent fabric store, and we feel very alarmed and nervous about what our future might be. And retail, given all the other pressures, it's very important to us that we can stay here, and we're hoping that you will see your way to doing that. We've been in the community quite a while, and we have suffered, as all businesses have, through ups and downs, but we like to think that we are not only the largest display of fabrics in America, but we help a lot of people visualize their ideas and craft. We were in 2016, we promoted the city's rezoning efforts before the commission, and it was our understanding that the plan was to help the current landowners in their business. We have our neighbors' support and the support of the Downtown Business Association. Even though the building is 63 years old and might not survive another flood, we've hired several economists and water specialists, if you have heard earlier this evening, to help us figure out how we can work with what we have. And we do believe that we can still make our business viable in this property at this time. So, and Howard, you had a few things you wanted to say.
Well, what I'd like to say is that Nancy's family started Pendleton Woolen Mills, an Oregon worsted company, and that was a basis for the city of Milwaukee for many, many years. The #1 employer. The mill-end store is known throughout the United States, and every major supplier in the country does business with us and work with us. We work with Nike, we work with all the major companies around who come in and make prototypes of their fabrics before they do something. To do that, we are a bulk, we have 60,000 feet. We have to have 60,000 feet, and the reason why we do it is because it's in our blood. This is us. This is the thing that makes the Oregon Worsted Company has many larger properties, but we want to continue. This is the lifeblood, we think, of the heartbeat of the bigger, larger body. But we've been here, and we've done everything we can to support the city. And it's very emotional that I get when I start talking about what we have to do to survive. But we cannot survive. Mr. Sutherland didn't have time to testify about everything, but he did a study to see if we could flood-proof the building. And that study said we couldn't flood-proof the building because the floors weren't built with piling, so it would break up. And we did that before the law changed where you couldn't flood-proof the building. And so we've tried every method we can to stay. We're interested in staying, and I think we're important to the fabric of Milwaukee's business community. And I think that our particular flood situation is one that separates us from other things. And we're not somebody mentioned we might be a big box. We're not a big box. We're just a little mill-end store selling fabric. And it takes a lot of space to do that, but that's what we do.
Thank you.
Any questions for the Dietrichs?
I have a question, and thanks for coming. It's great to hear your testimony. How many employees do you have at the Mill-End store?
We have about, we have a total of about 63.
Okay.
But we have some in the Beaverton area as well.
Mm-hmm. On top of that, we have a cousin called the Carpet Mill Outlet who's in the store and who also centers a large carpet operation in the United States. And they have 25 employees, and those employees are high-valued employees and produce carpet for the Toyota car manufacturer, for Ford Motor Company, for most of the major companies. They design them and they build them, and most of the boating industry. They happen to be my wife's cousins. So if you know how they got there, they're cousins. So anyway, and Oregon Worsted Company has another 10 employees there that work throughout the city in its other various projects, and including 2 hotels on Hayden Island and some other properties. So it's sort of the center of our business.
I have a question for you. So one of the options we have is a 10-year sunset, which means that if after 10 years, if that property does not redevelop, then it goes back from an MUTSA back to an NME. If we keep that 10-year sunset in there, does that mean that even without a flood, that you would be willing to redevelop within the first 10 years? Or would you just let that sunset clause go if there wasn't a flood?
I'm 70 years old. I have to get this thing done before I get too old. You know, and that's the situation. If for some reason it couldn't happen, for some reason that none of us could foresee, we would come forward and try to present an argument that something happened that everybody would agree caused a problem to that. But I don't see anything that would stop us from doing it before I die. And that's
so
good.
We got another 30, 40 years? Is that what you're saying?
Greg,
Yes,
I'm glad.
that's
I'd love
exactly
that.
right.
I don't think so.
So you don't have a problem with the 10-year clause?
No, I think that we could survive under that process because, as I say, I got to get it done before I die.
All right. Any other questions for the Dietrichs?
No, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, one more to go, unless if anybody else wants to throw in a yellow card. Brian Gunyer? Guinea, I'm sorry.
All right, good evening, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. My name is Brian Guinea. I'm the Regional Development Officer for the metro area for Business Oregon, the state's economic development agency. I'm at 121 Southwest Salmon Street in Portland, and I've come here tonight. I'm completely neutral on the issue. Business Oregon has a great working relationship with the Milwaukie business community for business financing and trade and development and kind of increasing the value of businesses. We also have a great relationship with the city through infrastructure financing, recently with the Kellogg Creek Bridge and other projects like that. As the economic development agency for the state, we're numbers of jobs and job creation is great, but what we really care about is creating and increasing the value of businesses in your community, both the value of businesses and the value of communities, because valuable, growing, expanding businesses create and retain jobs at any stage of the business cycle. So what I've really come to just talk about tonight is the status of employment and industrial lands and kind of how the state views that. Industrial areas are not necessarily located near the most important regional transportation connections, but they also enjoy protections against certain type of non-industrial uses for the efficient movement of freight. Many of the limits on creating new industrial lots smaller than 50 acres still apply, although cities and counties have more zoning flexibility. And from what I know about the NMIA, there's very little developable area in the Johnson Creek Industrial Zone, some likely constrained by jurisdictional wetlands and the concerns we've seen tonight. Despite the limited area for development, it cannot easily be replaced, and therefore should remain for traded sector and employment opportunities. I think currently zoned industrial areas are critical for economic resiliency, for the kind of jobs that they keep and retain, and they're difficult to replace. Just ask that you consider that, and we as the state and Business Oregon continue to look forward to working with the community and the business owners on the community side with projects like the Immediate Opportunity Fund through ODOT for some transportation access issues to the site, special public works funds for those developments, and again with the business community, individual business owners on business financing, credit loan guarantees, helping with trade and exporting. Be happy to take any questions at this time.
Any questions for Mr.
I can't think of anything. No. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does any member of the Planning Commission have any questions regarding the testimony to this point?
No.
No. No?
I have a question. Someone referred to an Eco Northwest analysis about the site and the practicality of developing it for industrial, and I'm not sure that I saw that referenced anywhere.
I believe that was Mr. Sutherland that brought that up. No, I'm sorry.
Is that somewhere to be found in our materials?
I believe, nod your head if I'm saying this correctly, I believe Eco Northwest did the study for the Dietrichs.
No, they did it for the project.
For the NMIA.
For the NMIA.
So it is part of that study, that analysis.
Oh, okay.
It may be an appendix.
It might be in an appendix. Is that okay? Maybe Amy can.
Yes, Amy. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
So this is one of those documents that we took out of the appendices. So you might see it striked through on there. It's called the Development Feasibility Analysis. And so it was conducted by Eco Northwest to look at several sites and their feasibility and run some scenarios for what the costs would be and what the gap might be. There is a gap on all the sites that we looked at to do any kind of office, commercial, industrial, but some are larger, some are smaller. Yeah. Okay. And that's on the NMIA website, but we could also send that to you if that would be helpful. I could email it to you.
That'd be great.
Great. I'll do that.
Any other questions? Do you guys, the city, have any rebuttal or any additional comments in response to the public testimony?
I do not. I was wondering if Vera or Amy had anything they wanted to add.
I don't think so.
I might comment on the Eco Northwest study. They did some modeling, and generally across the district, what they found that in today's economy, the only development type that was feasible or close to being feasible was residential.
Oh, okay.
on the mill and store site?
I'm saying in general.
Oh, in general, overall.
Yeah. And, and it was, so it was a little bit frustrating in that what we were trying to seek is information about how to see redevelopment for higher intensity employment. And what they ended up telling us was, if you wanted development, you can see housing development in the short term. So we did evaluate that. Part of the study was, could we use housing as a catalyst to spur something? And it was talked about, and it wasn't the recommendation ultimately wasn't that we follow that advice. So,
was there any outcome to that study of housing as a catalyst for higher employment in this?
Well, it was just try to make something happen to then spur on additional development. I mean, that was the discussion that was happening. And we looked at a couple of different sites. One that the consultant team was very interested in was the northwest corner of the district up at 17th and Ochiko, and being closer to Sellwood and being a site that could, the Goodwill site essentially is one that would be a interesting property to evaluate as residential. They looked at another site on McBroad as a potential site, and did they look at anything on the east other than things up in the
TriMet site?
MTSA, yeah, and they looked at the TriMet site.
And ODOT.
And ODOT property, right, with the historic building.
The whole building.
Yeah. And again, the most feasible type of development, not that they were all feasible, but the most feasible was residential.
If I could just, and we'll send the link to the document so that you can look at it. Some of the factors that had to do with that were the commercial industrial rents that we could expect to get are not as high as they are in other areas to sort of make up that cost of development, and also the value in the existing buildings. Yeah. So sort of the idea of tearing down a building, the cost of that, and there's a lot of value in those existing buildings. So that delta of of that lost value, and then new construction, and then the lower rents or lease prices, it wasn't penciling, when we looked at commercial and industrial. There were a lot of factors that were plugged into this whole modeling program that they have, but those were some of the kind of takeaways that they're just we're not there quite yet to sort of understand this, huge redevelopment opportunities, because we weren't there for the commercial and industrial kinds of development.
So to see what was sort of envisioned for this district would require some type of heavier subsidy. And again, we didn't have any funding mechanism for that type of approach at this point.
Any other rebuttal notes? I have a technical question, Mr. Raines. I'm not actually closing the public hearing, right?
That's correct. You are continuing it.
And so I'm not quite sure what to do now. Do we just go through our 4 questions? Or are we saving those to the very end?
I think you should have some discussion about the plan component tonight and about the testimony that you were given. You can pin down certain aspects of this decision. This is not a quasi-judicial decision where you need to finalize something tonight. You can start to pin things down if you feel comfortable pinning them down. So that's a perfectly fine thing to do at this point.
And so we're allowed to have back and forth conversation with Ms. Collis and you, Mr. Egner, and
yeah,
you follow.
Okay. All right. So yeah, let's if the commission is with me, why don't we start with question 1 and we'll go through 4. And then at the end, if anybody else has anything that they want to talk about, then we can add that in there too. Okay, so question one is basically, do we add the MUTSA down into the lower, for those of you who have already heard my spiel, I'm very directionally challenged. So down in the lower left-hand corner, which would be the 17th Millport McLaughlin piece. At our, just as a reminder, when we first looked at this, I think we've heard more elaborate detail tonight than we did in June, but it is still along the same lines. So I would like to get the commission's opinion on what they feel about option 1, option 2, and option 3. Mr. Jones, would you like to start us off?
I would prefer to not start.
Ms. Travis, would you like to start us off?
It's always me. Well, I have a question, actually. So, and I've walked this area a lot recently, and I'm still, where is the mill and store on that map? Because it's north of Millport, right? It's, no.
No, it's south.
Oh, okay. So it is.
It's the big, white, long building with the windows.
Right. I guess I'm just challenged in looking at it in this view. So it's.
There you go.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, that's fancy.
Thank you. Okay.
That's what we're talking about.
Okay.
I'll just leave that there.
Do you want me to start? Because I'll
go
say
for it. Yeah.
Here's the deal, and it's my same argument that I had before. I understand that industrial land is that has a value and an importance, and that it is going away. But here we have 18.4% that says that that we have industrial land in this city, but we only have 12.4% that is high-density residential. Okay, so now from what I hear from council and people on the street, that housing is the #1 crisis in this country right now. I don't even hear people saying, oh, well, it's lack of jobs, it's, well, I guess it depends on what you say, but I guess I'm just going to say that housing is the #1 most important thing. Here we have a situation where economically, okay, nothing else pencils. And in fact, if you were to rebuild that building, besides probably digging way down and putting in a whole bunch of deep pilings, you would end up with a parking structure down below, which, if you've been to any industrial site, and I know that they show the New York building, which is a one-of-a-kind kind of building, it actually does not pencil to have flat ground used for parking, especially in an industrial fashion. Don't forget, you got to get the goods in and out and around. So it ends up really, actually, to make it pencil, it ends up being either a high-volume retail, which you would talk about when I say high-volume retail. So you need something with really good margins and really turnover. So a grocery store, a big box store, what they like to call a big box store, a Target, a Home Depot. A Home Depot probably wouldn't really work, but. And then residential above, because you got to pay for the empty space. I personally do not believe that you should give one property its own set of rules. I think that's a lousy way to do things. So it seems very natural to the walkability, the livability, and the surrounding area that zone be mixed-use residential. It baffles my mind that we have a city council that whines about the amount of housing that we need in this city. And here they sit with an opportunity where it almost is what it can be, and they deny it. It blows me away. So after listening to the testimony of the Dietrichs, where they're okay with the 10-year sunset clause, and if they actually are true to their word, or if they are worried about the 10-year sunset clause, you actually have a project that could happen in the next 10 years to spur the development of this area. It just seems like a win-win-win-win all over the place. Instead of creating, really what would happen is that you just wait till the next flood or until the Dietrichs pass away, which is probably another 30 or 40 years, and then it's, right, and then you get nothing there because you can't actually build anything there. And then we'll be down on this road and we'll get some sort of variance coming across. It's just, to me, it just seems like at this point in time, we might as well just set it up with option 3. And if it doesn't happen in 10 years, then it goes back the other way. And who knows, maybe it doesn't mean that you can't have industrial there. So maybe the Goodwill store does flip over to this large industrial area, which the Goodwill store, right, is just a little bit north. And maybe that spurs, the rest of that, and it ends up being industrial. But why not give them the 10-year shot? I can tell you that by what we're hearing from the Eco Northwest and from what we're hearing about the industrial lands, even though that the industrial lands are disappearing, and yes, you may be able to get higher rents, you're not going to see that area flip over unless if City Council figures out a quick, really fast way to dump a bunch of money into that to promote it to be able to be usable. Just the street improvements alone.
So last time this similar question was in front of us, we did pass on a recommendation to City Council to extend the zoning. So I'm assuming that the baseline opinion for the commission is still aligned with our previous recommendation. We had instructed staff to keep this alive in our last meeting, so I don't think you need to persuade us. And I think one of the testimonies, kind of laid it out as we need to persuade council if we still agree, in a majority that option 2 or option 3 is the way to go.
I just went first. I'm
trying to go second.
Right. The reason why I think that is my layout, and that is my what my true belief is that that's why we should stick with option 3, and that we should make that to council.
I'm going second now, and I agree with that, although I'm kind of trying to think about a way to frame this that presents new information from the testimony or new information from our deliberations or just some change in the circumstances that would, rather than just have this be impassioned testimony and more debate to get changed by council again, is this going to become influential on the next phase in the process, because all we're doing is passing a recommendation forward. And I think the testimony was great. It was persuasive to me. It was more of what we've already heard. So I'm fine with just passing on option 3 to council, but what new piece of it, if we go around and there's agreement in this, what new thing are we going to bring to the table to pass on to council here? If we can't think of a new thing, maybe we can just get through the testimony somewhat, or through our deliberations, just say, hey, we're probably going to get overruled. Let's just move on, rather than extending the debate for the debate's sake without anything.
There is a hearing at the council level too, so it would.
So I'm just racking my head here. What's the new thing that would, that we can pass on to council as a basis for changing this recommendation, for getting them to change their minds based on our recommendation? And the things I heard you say, Greg, are the same things that we all said last time.
I agree with that point, Commissioner Burns, but what has been introduced tonight is expert testimony to the economic viability of what can happen for the mill store site and property with the special circumstances about its position in the floodplain, about its historic significance. That was mentioned in our previous hearings, but I would be hopeful, because my position stays as it was before with option 3. I support the allowance of this overlay for the redevelopment of the site for its viability, the sake of its viability. I would hope that there's been enough expert testimony introduced that this isn't it's not just an emotional issue. Also, though, I'm trying to think on their end is something evidently is not compelling them to overturn their understanding of the numbers that Commissioner Heemers cited for industrial land percentages versus residential land percentages. I worry that we're not going to derive a number probably that sways. And I'd also note on Eco Northwest work, and I think it stands up, but there are a lot of methodologies and tools that can be used to do build-out analyses, and that's not to diffuse that, but I don't think we can quite argue to change numbers right now. I think we just simply should reiterate. We have heard expert testimony. We've also heard from business owners who are a historic anchor in our community. And we also, I believe, have been speaking to the spirit of the goals and objectives of the NMIA. And we haven't wavered from what the advisory committee came together about. And so, frankly, I'd want my testimony in our deliberation to be about council understanding that we've had community come out. We've had experts come out. They're aligned behind very sound reasoning that I do not believe counters the goals and objectives of the NMIA. That's my take.
So with creating the overlay for 10 years, how does that change the percentage of land that's zoned? If you were to...
let's say that I'm going to take a guess here.
So from 18.4%.
Well, it's tricky because you don't really know what the percentages are. For example, we don't know what the NMIA is a percentage of that 18.4%.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah.
Unless if staff knows that off the top of their head.
I do not, but I think if I could just to answer the question, if option 3 is where the recommendation is going, the underlying zoning for the particular area that we're talking about is still the NME. It's still that North Milwaukie employment zone. So something could still come in there under that zoning. What we're applying is an overlay that someone could take advantage of to do this collection of additional residential or mixed-use type of development. It's similar to the flex space overlay that we have in central Milwaukee. The general mixed-use zone is the base zone, but there's this overlay that allows some additional uses that go on top of it, but it doesn't erase that underlying zone. So really that 18% number doesn't change. We're just adding an additional layer of other uses that could be taken advantage of should someone want to apply for it. So you kind of get both for that period of time. Okay. I don't know if that answers your question, but we're not removing that ability. We're adding some other things to it for 10 years.
I think we need to get a little bit more, we're going to have to give a little bit more thought into how we write the findings for a 10-year time frame for this sort of this aspect of, well, we're going to put this in place, but it's going to go away in 10 years. I mean, I might talk to this guy about how best to do that. But
it seems like we could tie that to the Eco Northwest
the economic conditions.
Nothing is going to happen
today are
under the current conditions, and 10 years is a reasonable period to see what changes with the macroeconomic picture. If we're in a different environment and rents are up and industrial pencils out 10 years from now, well, we'll be glad that this had sunset, and conceivably it seems like a defensible position given that study.
Turn now. I think a little bit of my hesitation to speak was just wanting to hear everybody else's perspective and wanting to hear a little bit more about the way that we as a commission and we as a city ultimately feel about this issue. There are a lot of people on the commission and in this room that have significantly more experience with this framework than I do. And I think that after going through the past few months of this, and especially hearing all the testimony tonight, there's no doubt in my mind about the economic, emotional, community, historical, cultural value of this mill end site in particular. And I think that there's no viable argument in opposition that it is not redevelopable without a residential element. That's my professional opinion. That's the opinion of the expert testimonies tonight. So I am, I guess, fully in support of that. The proposal that we're looking at, though, for that whole section is for a number of other properties as well, though. It's not just this piece of property. And again, my professional opinion is that creating an island of residential of one single property isn't realistic, like you alluded to. We have a housing crisis. We have a housing shortage in Milwaukie. Personally and professionally, I think that this area is a great opportunity to include residential. I just think that we as a commission and we as a city would have to take that stance that that's what we want, because if we create this MUTSA zone or MUTSA overlay, all of the properties within this red line, the highest and best use for those immediately become residential, as we've all identified, as we've all said. And so landowners, developers, investors, that's the target there. And that if we're okay with that, that's fine. But looking at the vision from this framework, saying that this is a strategic location to attract innovative and entrepreneurial businesses to create a strong regional center for next generation traded sector employment, manufacturing makers and doers. If we feel strongly that that's why I was asking the question of Denny is, does residential catalyze this vision? Then I'm all for it. I'm all in support of it. And perhaps, again, to what Mr. Egner was saying, maybe the argument was framed wrong from the beginning, that the redevelopment opportunity here lies in supporting some of the existing industrial and building that up and catalyzing that with residential or with retail or commercial or other elements. I'm just struggling a little bit to grasp kind of how we're evaluating this.
So I think I can answer that with answering Mr. Burns' point at the same time. Council's argument for not putting it in was the need for industrial land, and two, the competition it presents to land downtown. So the idea is that, well, if you open up this residential area so close to downtown, then you're going to have it competing against the density that is desired downtown. And that was their argument. Did I sum that up correct, Denny, in the most part?
That was pretty good. I think that is. Yeah.
And so I look at, I think that what happens is that there's an emotional argument on both sides. There's this emotional argument of downtown, and then there's what you, if you want to call the argument of the mill end store. For me, it's not emotional towards the mill end store or towards the Dietrichs. It's about the logic of what actually can be built there.
Yeah.
That's my take.
And so I don't know if we can make an argument besides the same arguments that we have made. And and that's kind of the argument that they made, is that, well, when we were sitting in this and working on this plan, nobody ever talked about residential there. It was always about commercial, and that the only residential was up near the light rail station. We've heard opposite from somebody that has sat on that plan as well, and opposite from our testimony who sat on that same framework plan. So do I think that our recommendation is going to sway what City Council has to choose? I don't know, but I think that we've heard testimony here that has certainly persuaded me to hold to our guns on this. Did that kind of help? Both?
That helps.
Yeah, and you know, from my perspective, I'm not concerned about. I mean, we're going to get to our needed housing, and you know, so when you're talking about housing is what we need. I mean, we do. We're in a housing crisis, but there's a lot of units in the pipeline, and so you know, trying to extract from the emotional around housing crisis, and thinking more long term around employment, industrial uses. I mean, it is. If you take it out of that use, you'll never get it back, really. So it is, I think, a big consideration. But what you're saying is the feasibility for some of these sites, and when we've heard of this property in the Mill End, it's not feasible for anything else. I don't know if that rings true for others. I mean, I feel like I need to read this Eco Northwest analysis to understand their methodology and the sites that they considered, and look a little bit more in depth at that. And it sounds like it was pretty short range, which, you know, I don't think that we should be thinking short range. So that's my leading comment around, yes, we are in a housing crisis. But I think that will, you know, things are coming along to address that. So let's not think short range necessarily.
The only counter argument that I have to that is that those lots are fairly large and that they've been owned for a very long time. So the real question that you have is that are the landowners, are they willing to take the gamble within 10 years of selling that property off, and is somebody else willing to take the gamble of building something there within those 10 years of that sunset? Most people, this is going to sound terrible, and this is no offense against the Dietrichs or any other landowner here, but most people are lazy. If they have income coming in, right, then there's no real reason to try to change that objective. I'm willing to take a gamble, especially with the 10-year sunset, that those properties would generally not flip or develop regardless of what the zoning of that is. Now, I could be wrong. Well, I've been wrong probably a couple of times in my life. But at least we know that in the 10 years, you at least have one project that has at least been vetted enough and been penciled out that there is a probability. That's all I'm saying. The other thing that we can offer here is that don't forget that this is not the final decision tonight, and that if Commissioner Travis, if you would much rather read through that Eco Northwest, and I think if everybody wants to go through that Eco Northwest, it's not really until January 9th when we have to make the measure of this key decision anyway, so we can hold off on it as well. We don't have to make a decision tonight either. And if that's the recommendation of the commission, then we can punt it and we can bring it back if we want a little bit more information from reading that Eco West.
To clarify, is it January 9th or is it the 12th of December when we would meet to forward?
They're talking about 3 hearings, so.
Let's use the 12th to really focus on the code work, and then you want to package everything and kind of make your final decisions for the 9th.
Right. Okay.
But I'm assuming, counting, that for the most part, you guys are interested in something that provides a greater flexibility on this site.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we would proceed and prepare something for you on the 9th that goes in that direction. You could still change your mind at that meeting after reading additional information or getting other testimony. But out of this meeting, I think we would take that assumption that we're gonna write something up for you for the 9th that would apply some version of option 3. I mean, we haven't written option 3 up yet. Tim just asked me a question: what happens if it gets built and 10 years expire? Does it go away? You know, and I was saying no. I mean, I think what happens if we'd have to write the language so that if something is built in that 10 years, it
can
fixes
continue that use.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But not the whole thing, just to each individual property.
I think so, but it's hard to say. You know, I mean, what if it happens on a different property? You know, it's surrounded. I mean, I think we'd have to reevaluate it at that point.
Right, and when we get into the code too, we'll talk a little bit about, because we have a limit right now of 30,000 square feet, right, in that MUTSA.
In terms of commercial use?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so right now, I mean, you know, their stores, so they may be back again to talk about that in the MUTSA anyways. All right, so I will make a recommendation that we just kind of kick this one down the can and we do a little bit more research, and maybe one of us can come up with a brilliant idea to be able to take away what would be the objections of council to this recommendation, or to strengthen their argument. Okay?
Yeah.
We good with that?
Yeah.
All right.
Continue.
Are we going to have further discussion opportunities with council, or do we just make a recommendation to them?
We will just make a recommendation to council.
Okay.
Yeah, what we're basically doing here is that we are creating the stuff to give to council, and then council is going to do what they do with it, and then it will be enacted into law or into code.
There's at least one counselor that always watches your deliberations.
Yes, I am aware of that.
Yes.
Thank you all.
So question 2 and 3, are there any questions or concerns about the proposed NMIA plan? Are there any questions or concerns about well, let's just take the first one. All right, so I have a goofball one. Everywhere where it refers to MUTSA, and we call it the Tacoma Station Area Multiple Use Plan, can we call it Multiple Use Tacoma Station Area?
Mixed use?
Yeah,
Tacoma
mixed
Station
use
area?
instead.
Sure.
So that way the acronyms all line up when you read it instead of it flipping around the other way.
Sure.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
If we were to apply the MUTSA to the southwest corner, I'm not directionally challenged. It's not near the Tacoma Station area, and so I've just been wondering, like, it's the North Milwaukie mixed use area if we wanted to apply it more broadly. So maybe.
How about the John Burns overlay? I'm joking.
But if we're getting into the
there you go.
The naming conventions, that would be something that could apply more generally.
Oh,
so there you go.
Interesting question, because that's perfectly viable to do. A special overlay can have its own name.
So I have 2 other things that I would like to add into the NMIA plan. And one is under Chapter 3 in the Eco District Framework. And you tell me that if this should be in this section or if this should be in the code. But I would like to see a statement that says all buildings 3 stories and above are able to supply their own amount of power needed during peak hours of operation. We talk about solar in this section and renewable energy, and I would like to be a little bit more specific in this framework plan. And I don't know if that is necessarily in a framework plan thing or a code plan thing.
So you're asking, if I just want to understand that any building that is greater than 3 stories in height.
3 stories or above.
Oh, so 3 and above would need to be essentially generating its own power.
Power or energy.
Energy. For
during peak hours of operation.
Okay.
Which you can define peak hours of operation by the way that they do it now, you know, whatever that is, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. or whatever.
That could be use specific too.
Right, that could be use specific, right? Okay. I guess if you're a, you know, residential, it'd probably be during the day, but I don't know, let's say if you're a major grow site and you got 3 stories, then you'd have to figure out how to do it at night too with your lamps on.
Does that really seem like you want to put that in code?
I either want it in code or in the framework plan. I want it somewhere.
Well, I think as a policy or a goal, you know, encouraging that to happen as a policy or seeking ways to make that happen, that's a perfectly fine kind of goal aspirational statement or crafted correctly a policy. Code-wise, it's probably a much harder thing to make happen and figure out how you would codify it exactly. Does that mean you're not going to issue a building permit unless somebody proves that they can do this?
Well, it has to be designed that way.
Right, but I mean, you would need to find some regulatory mechanism to make that happen. Somewhat difficult. Let me.
So here, the state just passed by executive order that all residential housing in 6 years has to be able to supply its own energy.
Right.
So there you go. You can use that model.
Well, thanks. I would say that putting a time frame in there might make sense, or tying it to something like that. One other thing I might just mention is the council has been having a similar discussion related to the vertical housing tax credit program that they're considering expanding where multifamily development could use vertical housing tax credits, and the discussion has been, if you're going to take advantage of that program, perhaps you need to be on, you know, either LEED Gold or Earth Advantage Gold as some other sustainable program that, you know, reduces energy use or provides some other environmental benefit. What I might suggest here is there may be a way of connecting what comes out of that program and this idea. So we could write a policy and then perhaps implement it in the same way that we do that. And one of the things that may impact is the thinking is that we should do changes to the downtown and central Milwaukee codes for the 4th and 5th floor incentives. Today we have incentives that you have to have residential in your mixed use building, and you've got to have you got to meet one of these sustainability factors. You have to, you know, either have a LEED certification or a gold. What are the other ones? The
Green Globes.
Green Globes, and one other. So if you meet one of those certifications, you can get the extra floor. I mean, we might want to do the same kind of thing here. So where I'm going with this is I think we could write a policy to do something like that. Implementation stage, we may want to make sure we're consistent with these other programs. And I'm expecting that the way this is moving forward right now, based on a meeting this morning, was that the vertical housing tax credit provision may tie back to the height bonuses that we have, and then we're going to, as part of a code update, we're going to go in and adjust the language for height bonuses. So we might do the same thing here. We might make it maybe the 4th and 5th floors are subject to that same type of thing.
Yeah, and the reason why I chose 3 is because once again, the New York is an anomaly, but most of your industrial is either 1 or 2 stories. So the way that I look at it is that, well, when you really what this either affects is a mixed use with residential up above, or somebody that does business in a unique way, like Amazon, who, if they were willing to build a building like that, would probably be happy to do something along those lines, or has the wealth to do those things along the lines.
Well, we're allowing, with these changes, we're allowing office, a total office building. So.
And an office building, of course, takes a lot less generation of overall energy than, let's say, a milling factory or something like that, that uses high voltage power all the time. Well, and that's my logic behind it. I realize that if you wanted to encourage it, that you'd probably have to use a new method of encouraging this type of funding. But I think with the way that the state has been progressing and the way that the city council has been talking, I think it's a perfectly viable idea.
Well, let us come back with if everybody agrees with this idea, we could come back with some policy language and hopefully tie it back to and we might end up with I think it's going to take a little bit more work to come up with the set of programs. We don't do certification, so we need outside people to certify that you're meeting certain standards related to these different types of environmental programs. So one of the tasks that we have is to figure out what programs make sense and which programs are kind of comparable. Like, is the LEED Gold program comparable to the Earth Advantage Gold program? Is that comparable to some of the others? There's a passive home certification that looks at some of the same things. So we're trying to put a menu of those together that would help to be the things that folks would have to do to qualify for these other benefits.
I have one more too. And that would be in Chapter 5 in land use. I think this is the right place for it. But I would like to say that a quarter of all residential buildings be now, and so somebody's going to, and you guys probably didn't see it, but this is a term used during the city excise tax, where they used a rate of 0 to 60 of medium income of the city, which I think that means 0 to 60 below whatever the medium, or no, it must mean that you're on the end of 0, meaning 0 income up to 60%
of area median income, right?
That all quarter of all residential buildings have rentals or availability to that group. So that means that every residential building built 25% of it would have to be dedicated to what I would call low-income housing. And I think that's why that group was separated out from workforce housing, which would be the 61% to 80 or whatever that is.
That's also really complicated.
Now, when we were sitting during our training, the attorney did tell us, well, you know, you really can't say that you hate affordable housing during your session and make that a viable solution for not letting a project be happening, right? I don't know if that goes the other way. Can you discriminate against people that don't want to do affordable housing?
Well, these are called linkage laws, where you link affordable housing to market housing. And at least in some jurisdictions, California notably, litigation on that subject has resulted in upholding local government linkage regulations. How aggressive they are compared to what you suggest we could look at. But conceptually, it's defensible.
My logic to this is that we know that people that are in this bracket range have a tendency to hold on to their cars. For one reason of that is because it's kind of their safety net. You're next to a transportation station. You're right there next to a job center, so that they can walk to work, or they can easily take a bus to work, or they can easily take a transit to work, or to the unemployment office or wherever they're going, I guess. But it is, and then at the same point in time, you have all this work that's right there, which, depending on the rules, of course, of low-income housing, they may have to move because they got a much-paying job, but it's all right there for them. So it seems to me to be able to tie in this affordable housing in with this industrial area, especially next to a transit center, makes a huge amount of sense.
I mean, essentially, isn't that inclusionary zoning?
Yes.
Yeah. And Portland has recently done something like that for buildings that are over 19.
Yeah, over 19.
Yeah.
It's 20%.
Units. I don't recall exactly what they require at that point. But
20%.
Over 19 stories?
19 units.
Oh, well.
But one of the things that we've been told, at least by the folks that are doing the Guardian project down here, that one of the reasons they're looking in Milwaukie is so they don't have to do that.
The City of Portland has had 0 projects go through under that since it has passed.
I will tell you this. I had our state representative of District 41 literally say that this is the most important issue that's ever been facing us. And so I expect the state to be releasing a huge amount of money for affordable housing, which would actually kick off these projects. Portland's been clamoring for it. We're just right teetering on that border that if you expand it into a metro, especially next to a transit center, it seems to me that the money is going to be created, especially with our CET. I mean, if the building that continues in the city of Milwaukie, there will be funding for affordable housing fairly quickly.
And so in thinking about transit-oriented development and access to resources in that channel, I mean, I don't know if you mandate it like inclusionary zoning, or if you try to do some incentive or make it more voluntary and encouraged, or if you say, if you want to get something like a height or something else. I mean, I guess I'm concerned about what Commissioner Jones is saying, where like when you mandate it, it may not, there's unintended consequences with doing that. So maybe you try to build in more incentives or try to look for ways that you can
Some of the incentives can be done through a TMA. If you have TMAs are actually nonprofit organizations. They're not actually tied to like state law or city law, but they usually are convened to serve a purpose, to provide services to reduce, say, rate of single occupant vehicle trips to the workplace. But Lloyd TMA is even more special than that. They provide services to their business tenants that they do special assessment services, and they actually utilize some of that money for some incentivized programs to help employers. That could be something that is done through policy and code that a successful TMA who may have the parking, a parking program in place there where the city can pass policy, where some of that money can be subsidizing incentive for getting fixed income or lower income residents.
So that would offset the cost.
That may be a channel that is more flexible and viable if it truly is onerous to actually put in the percentage provisions.
What I would like to suggest related to this is allow us to confer with Alma Flores, Community Development Director, who is great with housing ideas. I mean, that's her passion. So, and come back to you with a suggestion that tries to get at what you're suggesting.
I would appreciate that.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, it's huge. Huge.
Are there any questions, concerns about the revisions to the comprehensive plan or I'm sorry, does anybody else have anything on the NMIA plan?
I do.
No. I apologize.
No, that's okay.
Or the transportation system plan, including compliance with 12 goal transportation?
No. You know, with the tip generation, I would say that actually a housing allowance in this area it actually builds the kind of metrics that could produce better frequent transit service. So I actually think as long as I would like to think that we're going there with any of our incentives for allowing mixed use and residential. The TSP, I think you stated well about how you amend the TSP to incorporate the projects. My main concern was simply that in prioritization, if there are projects already in a pipeline that become kicked down, but I know that could, now that you're visiting new outlays, new funding potential, including from HB 2017, hopefully, that I'm not very concerned.
Okay.
I'm actually excited. I think you'll have something, hopefully, for opportunity for the projects. I hope.
We hope. Yes.
And then the last slide. Anybody else on the?
No.
I'm good.
No.
Commissioner Burns, you're the one that had the. Did you get your questions answered on this one? The changes or concerns about the proposed changes to the station area?
The answer during staff testimony was satisfactory to me. I don't have any further questions.
Anybody else?
No, I don't think so.
Just drawing a circle, right? Okay. I think we're good.
Okay.
Thank you guys very much. I know it's been a...
Just to go over quickly, so the next steps, again, the next hearing would be on the 12th. We'll go over most of the code, and then anything that might spill over from tonight's hearing, of course, but the code amendments. We have our first work session with the council scheduled a week after that, so kind of to start that work session piece. Although the timing of these hearings and staff reports doesn't quite work, you don't care about that, but the idea is that we will be able to talk to them. We will have had 2 hearings with you before we get to the work session, so it's kind of nice to have some of that overlap before we actually get into the full hearings. And then we would anticipate or are hoping that on January 9th would be the 3rd hearing, and that we would be able to come with a package and have a vote with recommendations to council from you. And then we would have another work session after that with the council before we start with their hearings, the first meeting in February. And again, we're anticipating or sort of planning on 3 hearings, a similar kind of hearing schedule with the council.
So at your work session, with the council work session, does that mean that you are taking the stuff that we are talking and you're talking to them about it?
Sort of prepping them for what the hearing, I mean, we're similarly, we would have kind of a general work session sort of PowerPoint presentation, but we would be, yes, we're at hearings right now with the Planning Commission. Here's kind of where things are going. And that way we can get some feedback from them, but so that they're understanding kind of where this package is going generally by the time it gets to them for the hearings.
So yes. I don't want to, but that seems. Could you ask council, hey, how do you guys feel on the MUTSA down in that corner? But then the problem is that can you literally come back to us and say they don't like it, they're not going to vote for it, so you might as well not? That's got to be highly illegal, right?
Well, it'd be complicated.
It's a special kind of revelation.
The system's fundamentally designed for you to give the best advice you can to the legislative decision maker, and the process of sort of trying to guess where they are is, of course, a natural part of human interaction. But I would recommend you give the best recommendation you can based upon your expertise and the testimony that you get and the input of your staff. And you will also have the opportunity during the hearing process to make your point of view known to the decision maker.
So I guess I guess my real question is then, can we ask them to bounce these balls off of council and then come back and tell us what they think about it, or is that just a bad idea?
Certainly you can ask. It's not typical, and it creates, I think, a complicated hearing process for the council to give you advice on what they think. They're going to have a hearing on it.
Right. That's why I was thinking it seems really odd, the schedule. Okay. All right. So, yeah, don't ask any bouncing balls.
Okay. No. Well, and they wouldn't have had, sorry to interrupt, they also wouldn't have had the benefit of testimony and all of those. So it's sort of them, it would be us asking them a question kind of in a vacuum. And so it's kind of unfair in some ways, too, to ask them to do that without the benefit of all of this testimony and all of this discussion as well. So it's, in some ways, we're sort of we would be generally kind of presenting work session discussion topics and key questions similarly like we did with you. It's not that we're sort of, okay, and here's what happened at the Planning Commission. I mean, they're paying attention to that as well, but it's really more getting them up to speed on the discussion items and the key questions prior to the hearings. We just kind of ended up, they have to overlap because they just do because of the timing. So, yeah.
So if we see a council member on the street, we're not allowed to discuss this in any way, shape,
This is legislative.
You can. Because it's a legislative process, people can talk to council members.
Okay. Thanks.
This is officially the last slide.
That's the last slide?
Yes.
I need to ask for a continuance, correct? And so I would like to entertain a motion to continue file number ZA 2017-003 and CPA 2017-002. Make a motion.
Motion to continue.
There you go.
Second.
Oh, we got a tie. So moved by Commissioner Jones, and I'm going to give, all right, seconded by Commissioner Argo on to continue the hearing on ZA 2017-003 and CPA 2017-02 on the North Milwaukie Industrial Area Comp Plan and Code Amendments.
Thank you.
All right, work session items, we don't have any. Oh, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Hearing none, carries. Thank you. Work session items, none, right? Planning Department, other business updates.
Well, did you guys, do you have the updates in front of you? I didn't notice.
I think it's in the packet.
Okay, good. So you got some code supplement.
Better follow my instructions to update.
I didn't see any.
Yeah, I think it's, no.
So.
No, actually.
I didn't. Now, I will admit that because of the Thanksgiving, I didn't get my packet until Monday, but.
Okay, well, I'll
it might be in the mail.
With Alicia to make sure that, it's possible that that's left over.
Thank you.
It might be left over from last time and didn't come off the agenda. I'll just double check on that with her.
It does say tentative.
Yeah.
Anything else? Nope. Planning Commission committee updates and discussion items. Apparently you had your first comprehensive plan update?
We did, yeah. So it's, as you know, going to be a long process. And so we just kicked it off last night and got to know the other committee members and where they're coming from, why they're interested in participating, but we really didn't dig into anything other than what you've already seen, which is the timeline and the process. So I think having a standing item, I'll continue to update you. They talked about having the next meeting relatively soon, I think.
I think it's in January.
Oh, it's in January. Okay, so
we're going to do a doodle poll in order to figure out what might be the best date.
Oh, dear God, those doodle polls.
Yeah, we've got to pull some information together for the next packet. December would be way too early.
Yeah. December is like tomorrow.
Yeah.
Or sometime. It's Friday. So I'll bring it, at every, planning commission meeting, I'll bring you an update and allow time to hear your thoughts on what we discussed.
Cool. I have a quick note, which might be important for disclosure. So I've made a job change. I now work for the Oregon Department of Transportation. The reason I mention that is because in case anything would come up where my purview, and the North Milwaukie Industrial Area is not. The projects there are Region 1, and I'm headquarters. I'm not reporting to Region 1. But in case I'm in Transportation Development Planning section. So in case any policy work or anything might come up which presents a potential conflict, I would disclose to recuse myself if needed. That's why I mention it. And also I mention it because now I can no longer say I don't work for the government when you call out us people who work for the government. So.
Well, congratulations on becoming with ODOT, and I have plenty of timing on lights that I would like to talk to you about.
Do you work in the Salem office then?
I am with 1 day a week at Region 1 as a guest.
Okay.
I found a van pool. It's kind of fun.
All right.
Yeah.
Bunch of transportation nerds riding in the van together.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. There are other state workers, so they do other state stuff.
Ooh, wow.
But it's pretty neat. Anyway.
I would like to take the opportunity right now to remind everybody that December 2nd is the Umbrella Parade here in downtown, and the lighting of the holiday tree or Festivus tree or whatever we're calling it. It is there all season long with the lights on. They just happen to turn them on at this time of year. At any rate, that starts, judging starts at 3:45. I believe the parade begins around that time. Santa Claus, of course, always leads the parade, and it starts at the Milwaukie transit mall, the light rail station, and ends up at City Hall with the tree lighting generally around 4:30. And you don't forget that Milwaukie Rotary is giving out hot chocolate down there, too, so it's a good time.
It's always good.
Along with that, December 16th is the Winter Solstice event, where you can stop by and see the Christmas ships. Check the city websites for time, but there's a bonfire down there on the bay where you can hang out, and the Llewellyn neighborhood will be selling pies and coffee. And along with that, there is Christmas at the Museum, December 16th, so grab all your little kitties. Santa will be there, and we'll have a guitar playing, singing some Christmas carols. Of course, there'll be some cookies and drinks and everything else. And so bring them on by down in the museum at 3737 Southeast Adams Street. That lasts from 11 to 3 p.m.
Cool.
Forecast for future meetings. I got all my city information.
Yeah. December 12th, we'll have a meeting. December 26th, we won't. And
so I will not be here December 12th.
I will be.
Mr. Argo knows that.
I'll be fumbling through the book.
Just remember, just continue the hearing at the end.
Yeah.
Okay.
Though it'll be much like tonight's format.
We'll see if Sherry can review the tape.
Yeah. So for quorum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, anything else? I'll make a motion for adjournment.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All right. So moved by Commissioner Travis and seconded by Commissioner Burns. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We're out of here.